So, when did you first meet Chris Sutton?
Let's see. I think I met Chris Sutton. It must have been the early 1990s. I was, I think, starting my second year as a PhD student at University of Denver, and he came in first year student sometime about then. And I had an office up on the second floor of Pioneer Hall, and this guy came walking in, and he was. The thing I noticed is that he was really tall. Yeah, he pretty much towered over everybody else. I mean, there was Jeff Engelstad, Keith Ratner, Jim Dorner, myself, and we were all about the same, height, normal height, and Chris just, towered over us, and he really stuck out. The other thing that we, all of us noticed almost immediately was his towering intellect. I think anyone, even a casual observer who looked at Chris, would immediately notice the size of his intellect. I mean, it was huge.
Tell me something about Chris, as a person. What's he like?
Well, he's a great guy. Great guy. We got along pretty much from the first moment. We met. He has a great sense of humor. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. I don't think anybody can say enough about Chris Sutton. Just ask him.
So you said Chris has a great sense of humor. Can you tell me more about what his sense of humor is like?
Sure. He used to do this thing called the two-legged man, which just, it just really broke me up.
But everyone has two legs.
No. He would walk around on his two legs. Yeah, it was hysterical.
So aside from walking on two legs, does he have any skills?
Yeah. I remember. He's an amazing sportsman, without a doubt. One time we were in a bar called Fagan's, I think, in Denver, Colorado. I think it was over on Evans Street, and he and I were sitting there, and we'd been playing a pretty intense game of darts, which is a sport. And we got done, and we walked over to the table, sit down and have beers. We ordered up some fresh beers, and they arrived. And he looked at me, just in all seriousness, and said, "I'm going to hit that double bullseye from here," which is a good, probably 25 feet away. And I there's no way he was going to hit that. It's completely impossible. So I made a bet, and I said, "If you hit that bullseye, I will drink this beer down one gulp." And he did. I don't believe he stood up. I think he just spun in his chair and threw the dart and hit the double bullseye. So I proceeded to have to pound down that beer. Quite the sportsman, our Chris. Quite the sportsman.
So that's not really a skill. Is there anything else?
He takes good pictures.
So your adventures with Chris are legendary. Can you share some of those with us?
Sure. Let's see. Well, I remember one time we went up, we were going up to, I think it's called Abyss Lake in Colorado. It's in between Mount Evans and the Sawtooth. It's not a very often used area up there, and it's a pretty good hike in. And so we're hiking in, and early in the day it was just really, really sunny and quite hot. And we're hiking up the way, and way up ahead of us, we see these two guys running, but there was this tree that had kind of bowed over, probably from the snow earlier in the season. And we just saw the tops of these two guys running along. They didn't have any shirts on. They were kind of jogging along, and Chris and I were walking side by side up the trail. And the tree was kind of across the path, and we saw that we were going to kind of meet at about where that tree was. So Chris and I stepped off the path, and these guys came around the tree, and the only thing they were wearing were tennis shoes. Not a stitch of clothing on, and they ran right by us, and I remember I looked up and I said, "Oh, you boys out for a nature run?" And they said, "Yeah, we love it." And they just kept on jogging, and Chris and I wandered along for a little while, and then we both just stopped dead in our tracks and put our heads down, and at the exact same moment said, "Well, you don't see that every day."
Wow, that must have been pretty surprising.
But we weren't half as surprised as the large group of elderly women we passed just a few minutes before.
So what else happened?
Well, after that we just kept hiking, higher and higher in elevation, and probably about midday it started to rain, and it never let up. It just rained and rained on us. And it rained so hard, unfortunately, that all of Chris's gear got just completely soaked all the way through. A good bit of mine got soaked, but almost all of Chris's, I believe. And we got up to a place where we thought we could camp, a relatively flat spot. And Chris pulled out his tent and everything in his sleeping bag, and the temperature was dropping. It was getting very cold, and he crawled into his tent in his sleeping bag, and his tent wasn't long enough. His sleeping bag was sopping wet. He was poking out of both ends of this thing, and he was, clearly miserable. I was able to kind of get us a little bit of a fire going and cooked up some ramen noodles and summer sausage for him, and was able to kind of bring him back to life. And we spent an incredibly cold night that night, both of us, very wet. And I think it must have been 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. We wake up, and I remember sticking my head out of the tent and looking up, and the skies were just lead. Just absolute, socked in with clouds. It looked like we might actually get some snow, and this was probably in June or July. Looked like we might get some snow, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be a long day. So we both crawled back in our tents and just fell asleep again. And I guess maybe around 7:30, something like that. I guess at about the same time, we looked up, and brilliant blue skies, and we went jumping out of our tents. We had every stitch of clothing, every bit of tent that we had it all spread out over these willows, and we stood on these rocks up at 12,000 feet in the bitingly cold air of the Colorado Rockies in our underwear, waiting for everything to dry off. But eventually it dried off.
Well, that must have been quite a sight. It sounds like it was pretty terrible. But things got better, right?
No. After we dried out, which probably took 2 or so hours, so maybe around 9 o'clock, we finally got everything dried out, and we decided that we'd hike up further. We'd hike up to I think it's called Abyss Lake, and take some pictures up there. And we knew that there were bighorn sheep and mountain goats up in that area, so we were hiking our way up to the top. We got up on these ledges, this series of ledges where the valley glaciers had come down, and we're moving along on one of those ledges, and they're in kind of a cake, like tiers, and we saw this big group of bighorn sheep moving down slope, and Chris really wanted to get a good shot of that, so we went scrambling over to this to the edge of this thing, and was going to kind of work his way down, but I think he didn't quite realize how steep it was, and started to slide, and he slid down that thing, just rocketed down. I mean, I was standing there and looked, and he was gone. I thought he just went off the edge, and I went running over there, and he had slid down this thing, and luckily about halfway down there was a ledge just big enough to stand on, and he landed on that ledge, but in an effort to keep himself from, falling to his, he had grabbed hold of the rock face with his hands and just left all of his fingernails and stuff embedded in the rock up there. I think he got his picture though.
Any other Colorado adventures you want to recount?
Well, we went working up in Colorado, up in the old mining towns. We were hiking over into a little valley where there was a town called Rexford, and we had brought our gear with us, and Chris had graciously offered to carry in his backpack the food and the water and the tents and the camping gear. Actually, I kind of packed his backpack for him, and I was carrying the map, and so we hiked into this valley, and took some pictures and did some things in there. We're hiking back out, and we hiked all the way up to the very head of the valley, and we saw this giant cliffs in front of us, and so we decided, we'll probably be able to get up those things. And so we started to kind of work our way up the very steep kind of cliffs, and there was this kind of couloir that was there, and we got into this thing, and we're working our way up, and I told Chris, I said, I can get up there to the top, but I can't get up with my pack on, so why don't I give you my pack, and I'll climb up, and then you throw me the packs up, and then you can climb up. And so he did, using only his hands and his feet. He stood there and took all the gear, and I scampered up into the top. But unfortunately, when I got up to the top, it was sloped, coming down to that drop off, and it was ice. And so I laid down on the ice, and I said, throw up the backpacks. And so he threw my backpack up, and it was very light, and so I was able to easily grab it and threw it behind me. Chris, throw up your backpack. And so he threw his backpack up, and I grabbed it, and I realized that it weighed about as much as I did. And so it started to pull me off because I was on the ice and it was sloping downwards. So I started to slide head first, and I didn't want to go off the edge of this thing, so I let the backpack go, and Chris bravely caught that with his face.
So I know you and Chris have traveled internationally quite a lot. Can you give us a story from one of those trips?
Yes, we have. In Michoacan, Mexico, we've done a fair bit of traveling around. I remember I was down there for another project with Claire Mahoro, and we were supposed to meet Chris at the airport in Mexico City. We showed up, and Claire and I had been having a pretty tough time. We had gotten sick probably from tainted juice that we had bought at a roadside stand. And so we were pretty under the weather. And we got to the airport in Mexico City, and I waited for Chris to get off the plane. He got off the plane, and Claire and I were taking turns waiting for him because we could only stand outside of the bathroom for so long without actually having to go in to the bathroom. And so we're just rotating duty there. And Chris came up, and he was like, "Hey, how's everything going?" And I said, "Man, I'm really, really, really sick." And he said, "Don't worry, I got something for that." And he reaches into his pack and he pulls out and he goes, "These are chewable kaopectate." I was like, "Oh man, that's great. Give me some of those." So he handed me a couple of them. There was a woman standing not too far off. I mean, she was clearly from the States, and was kind of overhearing our conversation. And so I got a handful of those kaopectate and put in my mouth and started to chew. And there's no such thing as chewable kaopectate, apparently. And kaopectate is noted for just sucking all of the moisture. And so all the moisture in my mouth was just sucked completely dry. And I could hardly talk, and I'm screaming at Sutton, like, "These are not chewable kaopectate," but you could hardly understand me because my mouth was literally cemented together by this non-chewable kaopectate. And that woman who was standing about 10 or 15 feet from us, she had her back towards us. And I looked over at her, and her shoulders were just shaking. She was laughing so hard. She apparently had overheard the whole conversation. So, chewable kaopectate, Chris. I still remember that.
Sounds like Chris is a great friend to have in a pinch.
Indeed.
Are there any other Michoacan stories that you can tell us about?
Yeah, we were down there to do some field work in Michoacan at the little Purepecha villages, and this is an area that doesn't have a lot of automobiles, so traffic tended to be kind of light, which of course meant that we tended to drive pretty fast. And so I'm driving along, Chris sitting in the seat next to me, and we are flying down the road. I can't remember how fast we were going. I think we were going about as fast as that little car could go. And we came around this kind of wide corner, and I mean, right in the middle of the road there was a burro and a little baby burro, and little baby burro was nursing. And we shot around that corner, and I mean, I jammed on those brakes, and the car came screeching to a halt. And those burros never moved a muscle. They just went about their business, and we drove our car around them. And as we were getting around them, Chris turned to me and said, "I bet that made the milk come out of his nose."
So by that time, you guys both must have been feeling pretty good.
No, actually that was kind of the calm before the storm. It wasn't too long after that, I believe, that we both ended up getting really, really sick. Chris was sick, I was sick, Claire Mahoro was sick. We actually drove her to the airport, and she left, and it was Chris and I by ourselves. And we're staying in this little town called Pátzcuaro, and we were both starting to get fairly dehydrated. We couldn't get up out of the room. We basically just sat there all day. And I don't remember what festival it was, but they were having this festival. And these drunk guys would climb on top of this roof that was not too far from where we were staying, and they had this little miniature cannon up there. And they just kept setting that thing off and then laughing and laughing and laughing. And so we would lay there, sick as could be, barely hanging together, and kaboom, this loud cannon shot. We'd hear this hyena cackling, in the background, and that would go on and on for hours. And then finally it would calm down and we would get a little bit of sleep. And then, 4 o'clock in the morning, it would start up again. And this just lasted, it seemed like day after day after day. Eventually it got so bad, we were really thinking that we were in a good bit of trouble because we were getting pretty dehydrated. So I think it was Chris who was feeling a little bit better than I was. And I sent him off, and he went to the local pharmacy there and bought them out of Pedialyte. And we laid there in bed and drank jug after jug of Pedialyte, which is obviously for children, but if you're ever sick, it works great. And we were able to continue to just drink that and get rehydrated, and eventually we were able to get ourselves back into the swing of things and pick up our field work.
So this question is coming from someone who is way far away from this experience, but what were you thinking when you turned 50, or what kind of advice can you give to Chris on his 50th birthday?
Well, let's see. How was I feeling on my 50th birthday? Well, I didn't feel fundamentally different than being 49. So up here, Chris, you're still 49, but your body has moved on. Your body is 50. Advice, fiber.
So is Chris still out at Western Illinois?
Yeah, he is. He's living in Macomb, Illinois, where the university is located.
Yeah, and you've been out there to visit him, right?
Oh yeah, it's a neat little town.
Yeah. So would you ever move out there?
Never.
It happened because you used to talk nonstop about Chris Sutton. And it would be all Sutton this and Sutton that and Sutton. And I finally said, Sutton Schmutton! And then it just went to mutton, straight from there.
So you're lucky you're not called Schmutton.
Happy birthday, Chris.
Okay, happy birthday, Chris. Have a great day.
Happy birthday, Chris. 50 big ones.
Boo!
The other thing that all of us immediately noticed was that he had this, towering intellect encased in this giant. All right, let's try that again. And the other thing that all of us noticed was this just towering intellect encased in an equally large cranium he had. God damn it. Oh, man. All right. I'm having trouble not laughing here. The other thing that we noticed is that he had this really towering intellect, and you could tell how large this intellect was simply by looking at him. I mean, any casual observer would have said, "My God, that man has a tower." Damn it! So close.
You have to at some point say he has a giant head.
No, I was just gonna let that speak for itself. Okay. The other thing that we, all of us noticed almost immediately was his towering intellect. I think anyone, even a casual observer who looked at Chris, would immediately notice the size of his intellect. I mean, it was huge.